The world went silent, then exploded with my son Leo's heartbroken cry. It wasn't a childish wail, it was the raw, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated devastation, ripping through the crisp afternoon air of our meticulously manicured HOA community. My eyes snapped to the source of his anguish, not the scrapes on his knees from a fall, but the sight of his electric mobility scooter, his lifeline to independence, being wrestled onto the back of a flatbed truck. Mrs. Albright, our HOA president, stood beside the truck, a grim, unyielding sentinel, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and designer suit a stark contrast to the chaos she was orchestrating. "Illegal vehicle," she declared, her voice devoid of any warmth cutting through Leo's. Cries like a surgeon's scalpel, and certainly in flagrant violation of our community's new speed regulations. My mind reeled. Speed regulations? For a mobility scooter? A mobility scooter that was literally the only way my 10-year-old son, Leo, could experience anything resembling freedom. Leo has cerebral palsy, a condition that restricts his mobility, but it never restricted his spirit, not until this moment. His scooter, a sleek blue model he affectionately called Blue Lightning, wasn't just a piece of equipment. It was his legs, his wings, his ticket to racing his friends down the sidewalk, to feeling the wind in his hair, to being a normal kid in a world that often made him feel anything but. Every day, after school, the first thing he wanted to do was hop on Blue Lightning and explore, zipping around our cul-de-sac with a grin that could light up the darkest room. It was the only time he truly forgot the constant physical struggle, the endless therapies, the whispered comments from other parents. That scooter was his joy, his independence, his identity. And now, this woman, this self-appointed queen of suburban conformity, was stealing it from him. I stormed towards them, my heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and pure, simmering rage. "Mrs. Albright, what in God's name are you doing?" I demanded, my voice tight with a desperate tremor. Leo, tears streaming down his face, reached out a trembling hand towards his retreating scooter, a silent plea that tore at my very soul. "Mommy, no! Blue Lightning!" he sobbed, his small body shaking uncontrollably. Mrs. Albright barely spared him a glance, her gaze fixed on me with an almost triumphant smirk. "Mr. Davies," she began, her tone dripping with a condescending sweetness that made my skin crawl. "As per the new HOA bylaw 7.3b, effective last Tuesday, all personal electric vehicles exceeding 5 mph on community sidewalks are subject to immediate impoundment. Your son's scooter, while perhaps a necessity for him, was clocked at an unacceptable 7.2 mph by our automated surveillance system. We have multiple complaints, I might add, about the safety hazard he poses to other residents." My jaw dropped. Safety hazard? He's 10. He has cerebral palsy. This isn't a dirt bike, it's a mobility aid. And 7.2 mph? Are you serious? That's barely a fast jog for an able-bodied person. I gestured wildly towards the impound truck where the worker was now strapping down Blue Lightning with alarming efficiency. "This is discriminatory. You know exactly why he needs this scooter." Mrs. Albright simply folded her arms, her expression hardening into a mask of righteous indignation. "Regulations are regulations, Mr. Davies. We must maintain order and safety for all residents. We cannot make exceptions, even for unique circumstances. Perhaps a slower model would be more appropriate. You'll find the impound lot details on the notice we left at your door this morning." A notice? This morning? While I was at work, and Leo was at school? She hadn't even had the decency to speak to us directly. The sheer audacity, the callous disregard for Leo's well-being, sent a searing, hot wave of fury through me. Leo, still crying, clung to my leg, his little fingers digging into my jeans, watching his beloved scooter disappear down the street. His world, which had just moments ago held the promise of an afternoon adventure, had shrunk to the confines of our front yard, robbed by an arbitrary rule and a woman devoid of empathy. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. My initial shock quickly morphed into a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just about a scooter, it was about Leo's dignity, his right to move freely, and the chilling realization that people like Mrs. Albright would step on anyone, even a vulnerable child, to maintain their twisted version of order. As the flatbed truck rounded the corner, taking a piece of Leo's spirit with it, I tightened my arm around my son, a silent promise forming in my heart. This wasn't over. This was war, and I would fight it for him, no matter the cost. The immediate aftermath of Blue Lightning's impoundment was a blur of frantic action, driven by a desperate hope that this was all some colossal misunderstanding. I started with phone calls, dialing the main HOA office number listed on the community portal, only to be met with an automated attendant that looped through a litany of options before depositing me into an endless hold queue, punctuated by elevator music that felt designed to slowly erode sanity. Each time a human voice finally broke through, it was either a receptionist completely lacking authority, directing me to email the compliance department, or a recorded message about high call volumes. My emails, sent with increasing urgency and detailing Leo's condition and the scooter's necessity, vanished into the digital void, met only by automated confirmations that offered no real solace. I drafted formal letters citing sections of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and explaining in meticulous detail why a mobility aid could not, by definition, be a speeding hazard in a residential community, especially when its maximum speed was equivalent to a brisk jog. Each letter was sent certified mail, return receipt requested, to ensure they couldn't claim ignorance, but the only responses were terse, pre-written templates reiterating HOA Bylaw 7.3b, often signed by a generic HOA management team, with no direct contact information. It was as if I was speaking into a void, my legitimate concerns bouncing off an invisible wall of corporate jargon and bureaucratic indifference. This stonewalling wasn't entirely new. Over the 2 years we'd lived in this seemingly idyllic community, there had been a steady drip of what I now recognized as microaggressions, subtle but persistent reminders that Leo and his unique circumstances were an inconvenience to the perfect homogeneous picture the HOA, and particularly Mrs. Albright, wanted to maintain. There was the time we received a passive-aggressive notice about excessive noise from recreational equipment, after Leo had been playing with his friends on the sidewalk, something every other child in the neighborhood did without repercussion. Then the bizarre complaint about Blue Lightning blocking a common pathway when Leo had parked it momentarily while tying his shoe on our own driveway. We'd tried to get a small, non-obtrusive ramp installed over our single front step to make it easier for Leo to enter and exit our home independently, but the request was denied on grounds of architectural consistency, even though neighbors had significantly larger, purely aesthetic landscaping additions approved without a second thought. Mrs. Albright herself had often given Leo a dismissive look when he zipped past, once even commenting within earshot, "Some people just don't understand the rules of a peaceful community," as if his very existence, his movement, disrupted her suburban tranquility. These incidents, individually minor, now coalesced into a chilling pattern, making it clear that the impoundment wasn't a sudden, zealous application of a new rule, but the culmination of a simmering resentment, a deliberate act to curb Leo's independence, framed under the guise of safety. They didn't care about safety, they cared about control and maintaining an aesthetic that excluded anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of normal. Days bled into a week, then 2. Leo's despair deepened with each passing day. He missed Blue Lightning terribly, the freedom it represented, the ability to play with his friends on equal footing. He became withdrawn, spending more time indoors, his usual boisterous energy replaced by a quiet, heartbreaking resignation. Seeing him like this, knowing the HOA had stripped him of something so fundamental, fueled my fury into a burning inferno. I spent hours poring over HOA bylaws, legal definitions of mobility aids, and discrimination laws. The more I read, the more I understood the brazen injustice. Their speeding claim was not just absurd, it was a transparent attempt to mask discrimination. They were applying a general vehicle rule to a medical device, ignoring its function and the user's disability. They were refusing to provide a reasonable accommodation, effectively denying Leo access to common areas and enjoyment of our community, which is a clear violation of fair housing and disability laws. Every phone call I eventually managed to get through to a live person at the HOA office ended with a polite but firm reiteration of their position. The scooter violated a posted speed limit. It is an impounded vehicle. Pay the fine and storage fees, and perhaps consider a slower model if you wish for him to use it within the community. There was no room for discussion, no empathy, no willingness to consider Leo's condition. The fees for retrieval and daily storage were exorbitant, clearly designed to punish, to make it easier for me to simply give up and buy a new, slower scooter. A scooter that wouldn't give Leo the joy of feeling the wind, wouldn't allow him to keep up with his able-bodied friends. It was a direct attack on his mobility, his spirit, and our family's right to live peacefully without harassment. It became painfully clear that this was not a problem that could be reasoned away. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate act of discrimination, shrouded in bureaucratic formality. My polite pleas, my logical arguments, my desperate explanations for Leo's needs were falling on deaf ears, ears that were deliberately deafened by prejudice and petty power. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I couldn't talk my way out of this. I couldn't beg my way out of this. The only language the HOA seemed to understand was the language of rules, and if that was the case, then I would speak their language, but with a force they hadn't anticipated. A simple conversation wouldn't fix this. Only a drastic step, a fight for justice, would. My determination solidified. We would sue. After 2 weeks of fruitless calls, ignored emails, and infuriating template responses, the decision to sue coalesced in my mind not as a choice, but as the only remaining path. The rage that had been a dull thrum beneath my skin now became a sharp, insistent drumbeat. This wasn't just about a scooter anymore. It was about Leo's fundamental right to dignity, his access to the world, and holding people accountable for their blatant disregard for disability rights. The very thought of initiating a lawsuit was daunting, a terrifying plunge into an unfamiliar, expensive, and emotionally draining arena. I started by contacting legal aid organizations, disability rights advocacy groups, and local bar associations, explaining our situation over and over again. The initial responses were disheartening. Many lawyers, while sympathetic, hesitated. HOA cases can be tricky, one paralegal explained patiently. They have deep pockets and aggressive defense teams. Discrimination cases, especially ones involving a novel interpretation of speeding for a mobility aid, are complex and lengthy. Others quoted retainer fees that felt like mortgages, instantly reminding me of the immense financial burden this fight would entail. Every no, every high estimate, every cautionary tale about drawn-out legal battles chipped away at my resolve. But then I would look at Leo, watching his friends play outside from his bedroom window, his face a mask of longing, and my determination would harden again. He was losing a part of his childhood, his freedom, and that was a price I was not willing to let stand unchallenged. Just when I felt the walls closing in, a glimmer of hope appeared. A recommendation from a local Cerebral Palsy foundation led me to the small, unassuming office of Sarah Chen, an attorney specializing in civil rights and disability law. Her office wasn't flashy. It was filled with stacks of legal briefs and a comforting clutter of advocacy posters. When I recounted the story, Sarah listened intently, her gaze unwavering, a flicker of outrage growing in her eyes. This isn't just absurd, it's a clear violation of the Fair Housing Act and potentially the ADA, depending on the specifics of the HOA's federal funding or property type, she stated calmly, but with a quiet conviction that immediately put me at ease. They're failing to provide a reasonable accommodation for your son's disability by applying a blanket rule to a medical device, effectively denying him full enjoyment of his home and community. And the speeding accusation is a transparent pretext for discrimination. Her understanding was immediate, her belief in our case unwavering. She didn't talk about the difficulty of the case so much as the importance of it, the precedent it could set. Her fee structure, while still substantial, was fair, and she offered a payment plan that, while tight, was manageable. It felt like a lifeline. With Sarah on board, the wheels of justice began to grind, slowly but inexorably. Our first step was filing the formal complaint with the district court, detailing the facts of the impoundment, Leo's disability, the HOA's refusal to return the scooter or offer reasonable accommodation, and the clear, discriminatory intent behind their actions. The complaint outlined the specific damages we sought: the return of the scooter, compensation for its impoundment and storage fees, damages for emotional distress, and punitive damages to deter future discrimination. The day the court documents were served on the HOA, I imagined Mrs. Albright's perfectly composed face cracking, even if just for a second. The HOA's response was swift and predictably defiant. Their legal team, a large corporate firm, filed a motion to dismiss our complaint, arguing that the HOA had merely enforced valid bylaws, that Leo's scooter was indeed a vehicle subject to speed limits, and that we had failed to demonstrate discriminatory intent. They portrayed Mrs. Albright as a diligent, fair-minded community leader and us as litigious troublemakers. It was a classic legal maneuver, designed to intimidate and exhaust us before the real fight even began. But Sarah wasn't fazed. She quickly filed a robust opposition to their motion, buttressing our claims with legal precedents and expert opinions on disability law. The first legal skirmishes were mostly paperwork, motions, and responses, a tedious dance of legal language. But each document filed, each brief exchanged, felt like a small step forward, a defiant declaration that we wouldn't back down. Throughout this process, Leo's absence from his scooter was a constant, painful reminder of why we were fighting. He still watched his friends from the window, but now there was a listlessness in his eyes, a quiet sadness that twisted my gut. He'd started asking, "When will Blue Lightning come home, Mommy?" with a heartbreaking regularity. Without it, he was more dependent on me, more isolated. Simple trips to the park or a friend's house became logistical challenges, requiring my constant presence and physical assistance. His world had undeniably shrunk, and the vibrant, independent spirit that Blue Lightning had fostered was dimmed. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a daily struggle for Leo's quality of life. Sarah understood this implicitly. She always asked about Leo, about how he was doing, and these small gestures of genuine care reinforced my trust in her and the validity of our cause. The financial strain was also very real. Legal fees, even with Sarah's manageable plan, meant cutting back on almost everything else. Dinners out became a rare luxury. New clothes for myself were out of the question, and every spare dollar was meticulously budgeted towards the fight. It was a heavy burden, a constant weight, but the alternative, letting the HOA win, letting them diminish Leo's world, was unthinkable. As weeks turned into months, it became clear this wasn't a quick sprint but a grueling marathon. The HOA, with their resources and their legal team, was prepared to drag this out, perhaps hoping we'd run out of money or resolve. But looking at Leo, and knowing that we had Sarah on our side, I knew we were committed. This battle would be long, arduous, and costly, but we were ready for it. We had to be. The lawsuit, initially a private battle waged in legal documents, began to spill into the public domain through an unexpected source. our community's often dormant social media group. I had posted a frustrated, heartfelt message detailing Leo's situation and the HOA's stonewalling, a desperate plea for understanding more than anything. I expected a few sympathetic comments, perhaps some shared outrage. What I received was an avalanche. Within hours, the post was shared hundreds of times, not just within our immediate community but across local town pages, then picked up by regional disability advocacy groups. Local news outlets, always hungry for a human interest story with a clear villain, started calling. A local reporter from the Valley View Gazette, Emily Hayes, contacted me, expressing genuine interest and compassion. We agreed to an interview. The resulting article, prominently featured on the Gazette's front page, complete with a photo of a wistful Leo sitting on our porch steps, sans scooter, ignited a firestorm. It laid bare the HOA's cold, bureaucratic stance against a disabled child, framing the speeding accusation in the ridiculous light it deserved. Public opinion, predictably, turned sharply against the HOA. Emails, comments, and even physical letters condemning Mrs. Albright and the HOA board poured in. Petitions circulated online, demanding Blue Lightning's return and a reevaluation of the discriminatory bylaws. Neighbors who had previously kept a polite distance now offered support, small gestures of kindness, and even shared their own past grievances with the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. The pressure on the HOA was immense and unprecedented. Mrs. Albright and the HOA board, clearly unaccustomed to such public scrutiny, reacted with a panicked defensiveness that quickly devolved into blatant retaliation. Their first move was to double down. The HOA management sent out a community-wide email attempting to discredit the news story, labeling it sensationalized reporting, and reiterating their commitment to safety and property values for all. They included a heavily redacted copy of the speeding infraction notice, careful to omit any context about Leo's mobility. They even tried to paint us as opportunistic, suggesting we were using Leo's disability for financial gain. This is not about discrimination, one HOA board member, Mr. Harrison, declared at a hastily called community meeting, his voice tight with indignation. It's about adherence to community standards and preventing liability. The scooter was a danger. Whispers started circulating through the neighborhood. Rumors that we were neglecting our property, a complete fabrication, that we were aggressive and uncooperative, a projection of their own behavior, even veiled threats about increased scrutiny on our family for any future violations. We received a sudden, unexplained notice about an unapproved shade structure in our backyard, referencing a small portable canopy we used for Leo during hot days. It was a thinly veiled attempt to harass us, a clear act of intimidation. Sarah, our lawyer, saw through it immediately. "This is classic retaliation," she stated, her voice firm. "We'll add it to the complaint. It only strengthens our case." Amidst this escalating public and legal battle, Leo showed a remarkable, heartbreaking resilience. One afternoon, a group of his friends, seeing him unable to join their impromptu race, came over with their own bikes and scooters. Instead of racing, they staged a parade around our cul-de-sac, deliberately moving at a snail's pace, then parked their bikes in solidarity on our driveway, creating a makeshift scooter parking lot for Blue Lightning. Leo, watching from the window, broke into his first genuine smile in weeks. It was a small moment, but it spoke volumes, reminding me that while the world could be cruel, there was also immense goodness and support. There were other moments, too. A kind neighbor dropping off a homemade meal, a child at school drawing a picture of Blue Lightning with wings, a spontaneous protest sign appearing on a community lamppost reading, "Justice for Leo." These acts of unexpected support fueled my unwavering dedication, reaffirming that we were fighting for something bigger than just a scooter. This wasn't just our battle, it was a battle for every child, every individual who faced barriers and discrimination. Then came the turning point in the lawsuit, a development that promised to shift the balance of power. During the discovery phase, Sarah's team unearthed internal HOA communications. Among countless emails and meeting minutes, they found a chain of emails between Mrs. Albright and Mr. Harrison, exchanged weeks before the new bylaw was even proposed. One email from Mrs. Albright explicitly stated, "We need a way to curb the excessive play by some of the younger residents. Specifically, the Davies boy with his motorized toy is becoming a nuisance and setting a bad precedent. We need a rule that can apply broadly but specifically address that issue without making it seem targeted." Another response from Mr. Harrison suggested, "A speed limit on personal electric vehicles could do the trick. It sounds official and is hard to argue against, even if its actual application might be selective." This wasn't just circumstantial evidence, it was a smoking gun, a clear indication of premeditated discriminatory intent. It proved that the bylaw was not created for general safety, but specifically to target Leo and his scooter. This was the proof we needed, the undeniable evidence that the speeding accusation was nothing but a cynical, discriminatory fabrication. The feeling of vindication, mixed with renewed fury, surged through me. This was it. This was the opening we needed. To truly fight back, the lawsuit culminated not in a dramatic courtroom showdown, but in a tense, protracted mediation session, a crucible of legal and emotional pressure. Sarah had advised against a full trial, explaining that mediation offered a chance for a swifter resolution and a degree of control over the outcome, even with our damning evidence. The day arrived, thick with a humid, oppressive tension that mirrored the atmosphere in the sterile conference room. On one side sat Mrs. Albright and Mr. Harrison, flanked by their formidable legal team, their faces a carefully constructed mask of defiance and practiced indifference. On our side, it was just Sarah, me, and the ghost of Leo's stolen joy. The mediator, a seasoned retired judge, wasted no time, cutting through the pleasantries and laying out the stakes. The HOA's lawyers, initially arrogant, shifted uncomfortably, as Sarah methodically laid out our case, culminating in the presentation of the unearthed email chain. The air in the room became palpably colder as Mrs. Albright's carefully composed facade finally cracked, a flicker of fear in her eyes when her own words were read aloud, exposing the calculated malice behind the speeding bylaw. Hours passed in a grueling back and forth. The HOA, now clearly on the defensive, grudgingly offered to return Blue Lightning and waive the impound fees, framing it as a goodwill gesture. It was insulting, a paltry offering against the backdrop of months of emotional anguish and legal bills. Sarah scoffed, countering with demands for significant financial compensation for emotional distress, punitive damages, and, most importantly, a legally binding agreement for fundamental changes to HOA policy. We wanted a written commitment to review and amend all bylaws to ensure ADA compliance, mandatory disability awareness training for the entire HOA board and staff, and the establishment of a formal, accessible grievance process for residents with disabilities. The financial aspect was important, but the systemic change was paramount. We weren't just fighting for Leo. We were fighting for every future resident with a disability who might face similar prejudice. Mrs. Albright, visibly fuming, pushed back on the training and policy changes, viewing them as an admission of guilt and an assault on her authority. Her lawyers, however, sensing the imminent threat of a losing battle in court given the email evidence, subtly steered her towards compromise. The mediator, armed with the evidence and the weight of public opinion, pressed hard. The realization that their meticulously crafted facade of impartiality had crumbled, coupled with the certainty of public humiliation and further legal costs if the case went to trial, finally broke their resolve. After almost 8 excruciating hours, a settlement was reached. The terms were a resounding victory, far exceeding my initial, more modest hopes. The HOA agreed to immediately return Blue Lightning, free of charge, and to pay a substantial sum for damages, covering our legal fees and compensating for Leo's emotional distress. More significantly, they committed to rescinding Bylaw 7.3b, issuing a public apology to our family in the community newsletter, and, most crucially, implementing a comprehensive set of policy changes. These included a mandatory review of all existing bylaws by a third-party disability rights expert, immediate disability sensitivity training for the entire HOA board and management, and the creation of a clear, non-discriminatory protocol for handling future requests for reasonable accommodations. Furthermore, Mrs. Albright and Mr. Harrison were required to step down from their positions on the board at the end of their current terms, a condition that was met with palpable relief. On my part, the paper was signed, the ink barely dry, and a profound, exhausted relief washed over me. It wasn't the joyous euphoria I might have imagined. It was a deeper, quieter sense of peace, knowing the fight was over and we had won, not just for us, but for a principle. The emotional impact on Leo was immediate and profound. The moment Blue Lightning was delivered back to our driveway, gleaming in the afternoon sun, his face lit up with a joy so pure, so uninhibited, it brought tears to my eyes. He ran to it, patted its seat, and within minutes was zipping around the cul-de-sac, his laughter ringing out, a sound I hadn't heard with such unburdened happiness in months. His world, which had been confined and diminished, instantly expanded. His confidence, which had wavered, surged back. He was once again the unshakable, joyful boy who loved to race the wind. For me, the resolution brought a profound sense of empowerment. We had stood up to injustice, to bureaucracy, to petty discrimination, and we had prevailed. The stress, the sleepless nights, the financial strain, all faded into the background, replaced by the quiet pride of knowing we had fought for what was right. The long-term impact on the HOA community was palpable. The public apology, though likely forced, was a quiet acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The new board, elected with a focus on transparency and community inclusivity, began implementing the required changes. There was a noticeable shift in the neighborhood's atmosphere. A thawing of the previous coldness, a greater willingness to engage, and a clearer understanding that rules should serve people, not oppress them. Mrs. Albright and Mr. Harrison faded from the active community scene, their power diminished, their petty reign over. Our fight became a widely discussed local case study in advocacy and perseverance. It sent a clear message. Discrimination, no matter how subtly disguised or bureaucratically enforced, would not be tolerated. Our story, born from a moment of injustice, had become a testament to the power of a parent's love and the unwavering belief in fundamental rights. We found not just peace, but a renewed sense of belonging, and the quiet satisfaction of having paved the way for a more inclusive, just community for all.